Now there's different processes for memory. Encoding is you're really receiving the information. That's the information coming in, and you're understanding it and are able then to receive it later on. Chunking and rehearsing is a way of getting information into memory. Someone actually brought up chunking earlier. It's the way we're able to remember phone numbers very easily. Why? Because we've got the area code, which is 1, the prefix, which is 1, and the actual number, which is 1. So we only need to learn 3 pieces of information because we've chunked in 11 numbers together. 3, 6, 9, 10 numbers together.
So that 1, 2.
Oh yeah, the 1. There you go. Storage is really the process of retaining information. And so when you're doing testing, you're really going to be looking at how do they remember anything? Are they able to remember things? Are they counting on their fingers? If you give them a list of words, for instance, to remember. The R-Bands has 10 words to remember, has a list learning test. The same with the CVLT. And so someone might say, oh goodness, I just gave you 8 words, but I know you said 10. That's a really fantastic way of learning information. That's a good behavioral observation to write down. And then retrieval, how do they retrieve information? How are they able to recall it? Encoding is structural encoding, emphasizes the physical structural characteristics of a stimulus. It's a shallow level of encoding, whereas phonemic encoding refers to the sounds of words. And it's an intermediate, and then semantic encoding is emphasis on the meaning of words, which is more of a deep processing. It's interesting, I was testing someone the other day who I gave the story to, and they were able to give me the concept of the story, but not a lot of the details of it, which was really highlighted their style of learning, which is to look at the different concepts, the gestalt of the matter, so to speak, but not all of the little details are getting encoded. So that's one style of learning. Rehearsal refers to maintenance. So that's one of the ways to rehearse is simple recitation. Mary had a little elaborative rehearsal is really bringing all of this information into light and giving it meaning. What does the information mean to you? Is it memorable at all? And if it is, then it's going to be easier to retrieve later on. But that's one way of rehearsal. So you could just simply recite something over and over again, or you can make it meaningful to you. Yeah. And if it's more meaningful, you're going to remember it better, which is good for anyone studying for the boards. Primacy is really looking at words heard first in the list is the stuff that gets into long-term memory. Recency is words learned at the end of the list. What was taught to me in school is if you have someone that can only ever remember the middle of the list, they might be malingering. Because everyone is usually a primacy or recency or primacy/recency learner. That's just how we all learn. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And it's actually come up in my work with inmates that, you know, oh, I can't remember anything, or they bring up a couple of things from the middle of the list, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Long-term memory organization, these are different ways that we organize information in our brain. We've got clustering, which relates to items that were remembered together, kind of like chunking. The concept hierarchy is when we identify a schema to what we're trying to learn and have a classification system for plugging it into our brains. A schema is actually just a cluster of information about an event or object. We might have a script. A script is actually a schema which organizes information about activities or events. And then the network is associating one concept to 100 different concepts. But what can affect our long-term memory? Number one thing that usually affects our long-term memory is mood. If you have someone who's depressed, they're going to have problems with attention. They're going to have problems with memory. It's one of the givens. We're putting all of our energy into staying depressed. And something that can help us, and something that all of you as good evaluators should evaluate for, is context and prompting. So if you give someone, for instance, 3 words to remember, I'm going to give you 3 words to remember. They are apple, penny, and desk. Can you repeat those?
Apple, penny, desk.
Very good. Remember those. I'm going to ask you about them in a little while. And then you come back and the person can say only 2 of them.
Penny, desk.
Very good. Let me give you a multiple choice, or let me give you a prompt. If I said it was a type of fruit, which would be a context, what would you say it would be?
Oh yeah, it was an apple.
Very good. Now, if they said I don't know, banana, then you give them multiple choice, which is a means of recognition. It's these are all important when you're looking at someone's memory, because it goes to your recommendations at the very end. Are you going to be able to say this person is helped by context or cues? If you say, okay, was it an apple, a banana, or an orange? And they say, oh yeah, it was an apple, that means that it is getting into long-term memory. The information is getting in there. They just need prompts to get it out. So your recommendation may be keep a day planner, keep an alarm, have someone remind you, get that wake-up call. But that goes to your recommendation, and that's why it's so important, because ultimately every report that we write is going to have that recommendation section. And what else affects memory? Well, we talked a little bit about depression, but there are many other things that can affect memory, and it all ties back to attention. All of these things are affected by attention. Schizophrenia. Someone's so internally preoccupied, they're not going to be paying attention to the things that are on the outside. Substance abuse. Really big effect on attention. Attention deficit, if they have impairments in the frontal lobes, that's mediating your ability to pay attention. Head injury. Now the very first thing to go is the last thing to develop. And remember, the last thing to develop is the frontal lobe, which is responsible for planning, organizing, impulse control, inhibition, and attention. And dementia, same thing. So how do we assess long-term memory? Well, like we were talking about earlier, the WAIS and the WISC and any other tests that look at old school learning, including information and vocabulary, that looks at your long-term memory. And then any other test batteries will too. How do we assess for episodic memory? Well, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, we get collateral information, we ask for the personal information, we get it verified. And then forgetting is really ineffective encoding, affected by attention, or decay. Sometimes memories just fade. Purposeful forgetting. Sometimes something is so tragic that we just don't want to remember it. And then interference. Sometimes there's a retroactive interference or proactive interference. And retroactive interference is that new information interferes with what we previously learned. Like, ability achievement scores are the only way to look at learning disability. Well, sorry, you've just been given a whole lecture on retroactive information that's retroactively activated. What about proactive information? Well, old information sometimes interferes with what we're learning now. So you might leave here and say, wait, no, I learned how to do this a long time ago. This is how you do this. What was that Dempsey saying? I don't remember. And finally, memory and films. These are 3 fantastic films. I don't know how many of you have seen these. Wasn't there like
First 2.
You've seen the first? Okay. Go out, rent them. I know you have nothing else better to do on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. And look up memory and films, and that will help you remember some of the stuff on memory.